The closeness shared with Seowoong sent Yongju into slumber on a cloud. A lazy roll left Yongju on his back blinking at the ceiling as birdsong poked at his consciousness. He stretched his limbs, brain hazy from what had happened. Did Seowoong wake in a daze, too? In only a week he'd grown more accustomed to this room than he should have. Dread clawed at him at the idea of having to move back tomorrow, to resume his own routine. The clock read a triumphant 5:30, hours ahead of his normal wake-up time. But, creaks above announced Seowoong's victory to greet the sun first. Most homes had balconies, this one had an attic tacked on like an afterthought. Yongju noticed how precarious it appeared perched atop the cabin roof. Windows lined each visible wall, top to bottom, soaking up every bit of sunlight. Were it on solid ground, it would be a perfect hideout. But its current location screamed death trap. If anyone inside were to make too sharp of a movement it might topple off the side of the house completely. Yongju enjoyed the smooth wood on his soles before stuffing his feet into his slippers. At the glass door he inspected the sky, no signs of rain, only a bright beaming sun. Yongju smiled. A perfect day to be out and about. A perfect day to redeem himself for all his previous mess-ups. The day after this one could be his last unless he'd somehow proven to Seowoong he was worth keeping around. Yongju's mind lingered on their kiss, and he fumbled with his drunken buttons, twice. Nerves and excitement swirled in his belly, and clouded his mind. He hadn't done it with intent to prolong his stay, but because in that moment a kiss is all he wanted. We should have held back. Seowoong was right. Another part of him countered with, but who's to tell us we must? His youthful crush had taken the reins, racing into a dreamlike escape. In this world there were no consequences and he could do whatever he wanted. Seowoong ventured to keep on track, to divert from their urges. But Yongju yielded and seized the moment. He prodded at the cracks forming in the man's composure, unwilling to let them seal up again. Eagerness overtook Seowoong's judgment, too, whether that was a mistake, time would tell. Easing first his good leg and then his injured one inside his pants, Yongju pulled them up and tied them at the waist. He pulled on his top, snatched up his shoes and went to the kitchen. The smell of sesame rice greeted him and a variety of condiments sat next to an empty bowl on the island. A jar of kimchi near the rice maker beckoned Yongju as he doled out a hefty serving. He popped the seal and piled several pieces atop his loaded dish before tucking in. Instead of standing at the island, Yongju elected to eat at the table. Sunlight hardly reached this side of the room. He could have sought out a light but didn't mind the gloom. Beams of light streamed through the window. Dust motes swirled about within them, putting on a show for Yongju as he ate in silence. Seowoong paced the creaking floorboards, retrieving supplies, admiring his painting from new angles. Yongju had no way of knowing what he was doing up there. Seowoong had yet to grant him access. It never came up in conversation. Yongju respected Seowoong's privacy too much to ask. No matter how much his curiosity hoped to learn what was behind that locked door. Although most of the time Yongju had eaten alone, today the artist's early start gnawed at him. Was it devotion to his craft that lit a fire under him, or was it avoidance? Of course he'd need time to process, but distance had the potential to undo progress. There was little Yongju could do, but hope Seowoong's thoughts also clung to their kiss. Part of him wished Seowoong were here so they could confront the issue and get it over with. But another part appreciated his absence. How red would he flush seeing his face? What would he say if Seowoong did want to talk about it? Would words come out in an earthly language or incoherent mumbling? Rather than sit and stew, Yongju decided to take the opportunity to explore the village. He washed his dishes, returned the kimchi to the icebox, and rifled in his pocket for something to write on. Yongju scribbled a brief note out of courtesy with a pen from the fridge before stepping out to greet the day. Roasting barley in the air reminded Yongju of his grandmother. A frown formed as his fingers found a pittance of change at the bottom of his pocket. Not enough for a small cup. Boricha was never his go-to beverage, but it helped form his childhood. Each whiff of the grain since brought the urge for a swallow or two. He bought a few sweet buns, instead, to placate himself and continued his stroll. Munching on the sweet treat, he kicked up dirt as he mused quaint shops along the winding road. The cut through the village was gentle but also indirect. The natural bends led straight to the vendors' stalls. The trolleys, whether electric or man-powered, would have cut his trek shorter. But taking them meant straying from the people. To be one with nature wasn't today's goal, but to get to know the faces Seowoong secluded himself with. Like his idol, Yongju shunned social settings. But children frolicking and the bun cart lady's smile, stirred what isolation never could. A passing elderly man, aimed for a brick well, walked his excitable dog eager for a drink. Yongju dipped his head, small gesture, his attempt to fight his inner hikikomori. By the halfway point Yongju already gobbled up 3.5 avocado pit-sized buns. Reminiscent of the donut holes popular at the bakery near his home, they were addicting. Within his shin, a light throbbing soon made itself known, protesting every step. Not agony but an uncomfortable heat and tugging. Aside the path a large flat rock sat embedded in the dirt, as good a place as any to rest easy. Yongju checked for moisture, and sat after wiping the loose dirt to avoid soiling his pants. A walk proved too ambitious to be taking on a bad leg. The sun was pleasant, absent humidity this time, so, pain aside, a perfect day to explore. Yongju angled his face upwards, rays snuck through the leaves and toasted his cheeks. A soft touch to his shoulder made him shudder and his heart jolt. "Oh. I'm sorry, dear." A lovely face, friendly and etched with decades of fine wrinkles appeared near him. An old woman. She stood hunched with a disposable paper plate piled with homemade rice crackers. They had a nice glistening finish, aerated likely with the tines of a fork. That's how his own Halma had made them. Hanging from jute rope around her neck, Yongju spied the name Han etched into a crude bark name tag. A small flower dug next to the name added a soft touch. And the letters, painted a delicate white. Painted chipped off in places but enough paint remained for her name to be legible. Behind her Yongju spied a wooden cart with chipped red paint. Much too large for her petite frame, and with wheels far too small. Lines and scratches matching its owner marked the passage of time. Wood scraps from unknown origins covered holes made by accident or Mother Nature. "Would you like some rice biscuits? They're fresh," she added with a warm smile. Did his worn-out appearance inspire pity? Not waiting for Yongju's response, she set the plate on his lap under the assumption he wouldn't dare reject her. Yongju reached inside his pocket hoping more coins hid within the folds. But the woman gave a pejorative wave with a wrinkled hand before he could do much searching. "No, no. Service." She sat down on a bench Yongju hadn't noticed until now, eclipsed by the tree's shadow. To soothe her aching joints she rubbed her knees, like a runner coming off a lengthy race, and looked back at him. Yongju opened his mouth to protest but it earned him a stern glare. Reminding him of his grandmother when he had done something worth her disapproval. It told him that he ought not push the issue so he smiled back in gratitude. "Thank you," he said, and crunched down on one. The perfect blend of salty and sweet with a light buttery aftertaste. He must have made a sound of approval because the woman let out a content chuckle. Yongju wolfed down the food, and she smiled. "He finally let you out to explore." "I'm sorry. Our local celebrity." She gestured toward Seowoong's cabin with a crooked finger. "Quite the handsome young man. A bit surly though." At the beginning of the week Yongju might have agreed. Their first meeting on the porch Seowoong looked poised to push him back down the steps. But now Yongju knew him better. He wasn't cold. Not as he first thought. Just damaged. Trauma enhanced his stern manner, and isolation powered his initial lacking etiquette. Well, he paused, considering the best way to answer while maintaining Seowoong's privacy. She had known Seowoong. Likely better than Yongju did. But he didn't want to share information Seowoong would prefer to keep to himself. It would not be his place to say anything tarnishing. Especially when he hadn't been of terrible character to him at all. He can be standoffish. Yes, but he's been nothing but kind to me. The woman raised an eyebrow, as if shocked, but then nodded, her expression softening again. He's a good kid. Life's given him a rough go of things these past years. An old man crossed the street with a rickety bicycle, beckoned over by an excitable Ms. Han. The bike's chain had sprung free and dragged in the dirt. The man looked irritated, like this was not the first time today. He wheeled up to the bench, gave Ms. Han a warm smile, Yongju, a polite nod of the head, and squatted in the dirt. On the ground he tried to fix the chain back in place. As he worked, the man interjected like he had every right to be intruding on the conversation. So you're the young fella staying with Choe's boy? I am. Lee Yongju, sir. Yongju set the plate aside so as not to litter the ground with Ms. Han's offering whilst he gave a courteous bow. A few left. Indeed they were delectable. The plate held more crumbs than crackers now. When Yongju lifted his head again, the man was now looking at him from underneath big bushy eyebrows. Self-conscious by his mess, Yongju wiped the cracker crumbs from his pant leg. The light color he'd chosen today did well to hide the majority of crisp snacks carnage. How's he been treating you? For some reason their steamy encounter at the waterfall popped into Yongju's mind. If he had a mouthful of cracker he'd choke. Pressing the back of his hand to his heated cheek, Yongju replaced the thought with one more PG. The first time they shared a meal. Their emotion-filled discussion on the steps. He's been wonderful. The time spent with him exposed how the man's gentleness beneath the harsh facade. How innate his tender nature must have been since boyhood. He hid it at first, but couldn't hide it altogether. It's not that he wanted to come off as a stickler, but civility was vital to him. Seeing as he hadn't spent much time around people in years, he was out of practice in his approach. But Yongju would never put the sole blame on him for that. Not given what he knew now. The two played off one another. Yongju soaked everything in. He grew to understand how much Seowoong's deep grief and isolation shaped his retreat from the world. How resonant his existence had actually been to the village as a bright, happy child. The elderly pair filled him in on youthful moments. How his appearances in town lessened as a teenager but made time to stop by the stalls on a weekly basis. When school kept him too busy to chat, he'd sit nearby beneath the trees to do his homework, work on projects. And wherever there was Seowoong, Grandpa Choe wasn't far off. He'd brag about his grandson. The one he'd raised from a tot since his daughter refused to acknowledge parenthood. On slow days they'd chat while Seowoong played with the other boys. If he hadn't time for that, instead Grandpa Choe would wave, hello, grinning ear to ear. An integral part of the community from the sounds of things, and he doted on Seowoong like he was his own child. They missed him a great deal. Both of them. But since the elder Choe's death, Seowoong had all but disappeared. Sometimes I see him walking at night. He moves like a ghost. If not for my insomnia keeping me awake, I'd not see him at all. It's a gift in that respect. Ms. Han wiped a tear from her eye. Were I more spry, I'd chase him down. Call out. That neighbors would hate me. But hell, I miss him. Yongju finished the last cracker and the old woman reached to take the plate back. Now when I can't sleep, I sit at the window. If I'm lucky I'll catch him walking by. The poor dear. Looks so tired. Miserable. So lonely. Ms. Han reached over to give Yongju a few light taps on the knee with her palm, then rest her hand back on her rumpled skirt. I'm glad he's got you as company. Should do him some good. Yongju gave a hesitant smile. He hadn't the heart to tell her he'd be gone soon. Guilt-panged, unsure whether his presence was helping or hindering. Judging by that kiss the other day, he leaned towards the former. One thing he learned from this excursion was that the community cared for Seowoong. They'd always be there for him if needed. They'd give him his space and let him come back to them in his own due time. Yongju would tell him at some point before he left. He gazed back up the mountain, feeling both closer and further from Seowoong than he ever had before. On arrival to the cabin, the same empty kitchen that bid him farewell earlier greeted Yongju now. Dirt fell from his shoes as he knocked them together twice and set them on the porch before heading inside. He stood in the doorway listening as Seowoong paced the studio. Yongju sat in a chair, running a hand through tousled locks. Fiery wet strands clung to his skin, and he longed to shower before Seowoong could call on him again. With a hefty exhale, Yongju leaned back, toying with his necklace. Fresh insight to his idol strengthened the urge to hold him, but for different reasons. "You're back." Yongju hadn't heard Seowoong descend the attic steps to stop in the doorway. Yongju's heart skipped a beat, not at the man's sudden appearance but attire. Shirtless beneath paint-stained overalls, one strap hanging broken off his shoulder. He'd seen his bare physique before. But somehow Yongju found Seowoong's sweaty sheen and paint-splotched skin alluring. "Were you looking for me?" Seowoong lifted his gaze from the floor and shook his head, a little too fast. Yongju didn't much care for the abruptness of his answer. He had hoped for a modicum of displeasure drawn up by his absence. But likely Seowoong hadn't noticed he left, alerted hours later upon seeing Yongju head up the steps. A wayward blue smear on his cheek elicited a smirk from Yongju. He hid behind his hand. Was it the same painting from the other day? A result of Yongju's impromptu portrait sitting in his room while fresh wounds throbbed out of frame. Or, had he selected one of the other photos he had snapped of Yongju days prior and started anew? Either way, Yongju anticipated the final product. Yongju snatched up the paper bag he'd set on the kitchen table, gift from Ms. Han. They held the only sweet buns that survived the walk back. Sweeter than the ones he bought upon entering the village, sold to Yongju by a man with a sour demeanor. Both recipes were scrumptious. But Ms. Han's, though smaller, had a dusting of cinnamon sugar. They rolled around the bottom of the bag, an enticing aroma wafting out the top. The gift had potential to redeem Yongju's silent departure. Although he did leave a note, Seowoong hadn't left the attic studio to have read it. Seowoong rejected the treats with a shake of his head, his expression affable. I was curious about your home." Yongju poked one of the buns through the bag, avoiding eye contact, then thrust his hand in to grab it. He popped it in his mouth. "How is she?" Seowoong stared at the bag from the doorway, noticing the logo. Was he afraid to get any closer? What did he think would happen if he did? In his defense, Yongju craved a taste of Seowoong's lips again. Since their lips parted. But he vowed to give the man his space for the time being. He'd already admitted the younger man stirred feelings he ought not be having. That knowledge would have to be enough for now. "She seems lively," Yongju said after swallowing, licking a crumb from his lip. "But you know," Yongju leaned back in his chair to grant himself the freedom to stretch his sore leg. The move did not go unnoticed, and Yongju gave the man a small smile as if to tell him without speaking words, "I'm okay." Yongju didn't dare mention the things she told him about Seowoong's late grandfather. They were sweet and touching comments. Sure to make Seowoong happy. To hear that his grandfather endured in high regard. But Yongju didn't want to sour Seowoong's mood further, bringing him up. He'd tell him another day, if he were so fortunate. Yongju's contractual obligation was nearing the end. Seowoong would soon need to decide Yongju's fate. Would he make Yongju his long-term muse or send him packing? Leaving Yongju to remember these 7 days as a prolonged spectacular dream. "Your painting. Is it going well?" Yongju changed the subject to Seowoong's art. He longed to see what Seowoong had done today. Seowoong twiddled a paintbrush between his fingers. "It's coming together. Thank you." Thank you for asking. Or thank you for being my model. Yes, he was being paid for sitting for the artist, enough to cover several months' rent, but had he earned it? Past editorial shoots placed him various settings, cycled him through countless poses. Sometimes awkward, uncomfortable, and on occasion, painful. Whereas, sitting for Seowoong was hardly exertion. At least to Yongju. His elevated nervousness level, understandable given who Seowoong was. But as week breezed by, had he done anything of note worth the payment? Seowoong walked over to the island where he stopped to look down at something on the granite surface. Likely the note. He smirked, his eyes flitting up to Yongju who stiffened in his seat, struggling not to gawk. I'm going to wash up, he said, realizing he'd need more than a quick wash at the sink to reach a food-safe state. Then I'll make us something to eat. To ease his self-perceived uselessness, after eating Yongju insisted upon another shoot. If he had to go he wanted to leave the man with ample material to work with. To assure himself he'd not been a total waste of Seowoong's time. The tree line at the back of his stunning mountain property served as the backdrop, a large pine as his prop. A simple shoot. Nothing spectacular or grandiose. But Yongju gave it his all. Staring down the camera with intensity, Yongju disregarded his stinging wounds. He wouldn't allow anyone, including himself, to say he hadn't worked hard till the end. His eyelids grew heavy but he played it off as if for artistic effect. Awash in relief when Seowoong called it a night, Yongju praised his tenacity. Back at the deck, the artist bid him good night. Returning the sentiment, Yongju collapsed into a chair after Seowoong disappeared inside. As he looked out upon the yard, Yongju's chilled fingers longed for a hot cocoa. The night atmosphere was quiet and the property peaceful. If a fire blazed in the pit in front of him and he had a good book and a blanket to snuggle under, the night would be perfect. Yongju rested his hand over his sated stomach. Seowoong plied him with mushroom broth mandu, rice cakes and braised tofu bibimbap. The tofu had bathed in brine for days. When had there been time to prep it? But the rest of the meal Seowoong whipped right up on the spot. Yongju wanted to help, and Seowoong was reluctant to agree. And as Yongju helped cut the veggies, he kept a notable distance. But the way Seowoong's cheeks flushed from the other side of the island was telling. Seowoong wanted to close the distance between them as much as Yongju, and that was something. Beyond a few messages from his sister, life at home offered nothing new. If Yongju's response came delayed, she'd worry and call him regardless of the midnight hour. After a prompt reply, Yongju dropped the phone in his lap. Surveying his surroundings, his mind played yesterday's scene again. Before that kiss he had delusions to keep him warm at night. Now he had actual fuel to stoke the fire of his fantasies. Seowoong's mouth on his own carried the urgency of a man relishing his brief lapse in restraint. His touch on Yongju's waist firm enough that Yongju wouldn't slip from his grasp, yet careful so as not to cause pain. Closeness made the reaction of their lower bodies unmistakable. Crickets chirped. The moon shone brighter than the porch lights extinguished due to inactivity. Sleep prodded at him with persistence. It'd be normal for him to be abed at this hour, but to ignore the chance to embrace nature while he could would haunt him. Sure, Yongju had a porch of his own, a swing scarcely used unless Emmy came to visit. But using either put him in danger of running into his neighbors. Most days Yongju wanted to enjoy the fresh air alone, minus the small talk. Here, solitude came easy. Yongju's phone dimmed in his hand, the vibrant colors of his game failing to hold his focus. Somewhere behind him came a gentle click. Or perhaps a crackle of something moving through the trees. Whatever it was soon lost relevance as Yongju was fading fast. A cover he didn't have before spread sudden warmth over his legs. His phone somehow transported from his grasp to the table next to him. The click came again, this time, unnoticed. Yongju's eyes had shut out the night and his surroundings, and whatever lingered nearby. His phone screen lit up a final time before darkness took over one more. Can I finally meet your mysterious artist boyfriend?
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more.